and Mrs. Bush, tonight's Rice Lecture, featuring that dynamic tandem couple of James Carville and Mary Matalin. Boy, is that an understatement. As you all know, James and Mary are established TV personalities well known for their writings and political observations. I think you're in for a real treat tonight that'll be interesting, informative, and most of all, probably very entertaining. Before we begin tonight's program, I have a few announcements to make. First of all, we do have an overflow crowd tonight. In the adjoining auditorium, we have about 250 people, so I ask that at the end of this program, those people remain seated because the President and James and Mary will come by and visit with you as well in person. Secondly, at the conclusion of their comments, James and Mary will be more than happy to take questions from the auditorium. If you'd like to pose a question, please make it brief so that we can get as many questions as possible in and use the microphones that are in the center aisles toward the front of the auditorium. Additional announcements, I'd first of all like to thank Britt and Kay Rice for their support of this Rice Lecture Series. They have been very generous supporters of the Bush Library Center over the years, and we greatly appreciate their continued support, and I'm glad that they were able to join us here tonight. Secondly, we have a number of special guests, but none are more special than the Bush School student recruits, and there's about 50 of them, and where are you all seated? Back there. Welcome. And I'm glad to note that Dean Card, who's seated here in the front, has said you're all excellent recruits, and he's looking forward to all of you attending. A little pressure, Andy. Tonight's program is going to be moderated by that famous Houston TV and radio personality, Jim McGrath. Jim, did I get that right? All right, Jim, you're on.
Welcome to this installment of the Kay and Britt Rice Speaker Series. I'm Jim McGrath at the Bush office in Houston, and it's great to look out and see so many fellow political junkies here because we are indeed blessed to have two of the most sought-after, respected political commentators, experts, gurus, whatever you want to call them. They've done it all. They've done it all, and they're back here on the campus of Texas A&M. Back here at the Bush Library Complex for their second joint appearance. Last one was almost 9 years ago to the day. And I think it's fair to say that outside of the distinguished couples that have actually resided in the White House, Mary Matalin and James Carville are certainly the best known political couple in America today. They've done it all, and their accomplishments are certainly well known to this audience. And so it's my challenge tonight, and a little bit later on with you is audience questions. Our challenge is to try to coax these shy and retiring individuals to maybe share a few insights about certainly the political process unfolding before us today. And maybe a little bit later on, if we have time, we'll get into a little bit of life its own self. I think the hour is going to fly by. There's a lot to cover, so I just want to jump right in. And proving that chivalry is not dead, Mary, I'd like to throw the first question to you. 20 debates now on the Republican side. 9 or 10 states have had their caucuses, their primaries. We've got some big contests coming up in Arizona and Michigan, Super Tuesday. Assess for our audience, if you would, the Republican field, the nominating process as it's playing out this time. Is it going too slow? Candidates getting too bloodied? And then look ahead to the fall and tell us how you see the landscape shaping up.
First and foremost, and I will translate for my husband, howdy. Howdy, honey. Because you won't understand it when he says it. My father used to call every time we finished on Meet the Press, and he'd say, I'd be so much more angry at your husband if I could understand a word he was saying. So, howdy. Secondly, we are so honored to be here with our beloved Bushes, and thank you, Rices, for doing this. And we're just so happy that Mrs. Bush, for about a decade, called James he who shall not be named. So I guess after our third visit, he now has a name. So thank you. We're so happy to be here. And well, this is a unique, but James and I laugh because we are in the bloviating business, and the breathlessness of the bloviating culture is usually unwarranted. But in this case, this isn't a historic election. When we were working these roads, and I see Phil and all of our gang over there, you knew who the nominee was going to be. That didn't mean it wasn't going to be a spirited contest. There was no such thing as proportional allocation of delegates, which is a disincentive for a shorter process or anybody to drop out. And you didn't have the kind of media we had, and we did the 20 debates. Can you even imagine that, Mr. President? The only time I've ever saw a President Poppy upset, Phil, was the debate prep. It just, think if you had to do 20 of those. I can't even, and sitting in those little school chairs the other night, but on the general, so of the unique things, I think the debate over, does it help or hurt? I think it looks like it's hurting now because of the diminution of the generic ballot or their numbers, the candidates' numbers versus President Obama's, but that can't help but happen in a case where all the Republicans are shooting at each other and the president's shooting at Republicans. But when there's a head-to-head, the fundamentals of this race are a very difficult terrain for President Obama. And unlike most of the cognoscenti that thinks it's about the economy, stupid, parroting my husband, who first said that in your race, and he can do these 15-second sound bites because he's the attention span of a gnat. They're pretty smart. I think it's bigger than that. I think it's bigger than the economy, and I think the debates did not allow any of our candidates who are all capable of doing it explaining and articulating a conservative vision of governance, which is the greater the government, the greater the corrosive impact on the culture, the corrosive impact on the economy. We got to make that case. We'll make that case. I'll be happy when the debates are over and they're one-on-one. But I'm pretty confident about the general election.
First of all, welcome all you Democrats, both of you. Look, I think there are two values that are associated with President and Ms. Bush, and it's honesty and courtesy. So I'm trying to give you an honest but polite answer. It's not going very well. It's just not. And if you think about it in a historical term, the most orderly and predictable event in any democracy anywhere in the world has been the way that U.S. Republicans pick their presidential candidate. It always goes to the senior guy, without fail, since 1944. The only possible exception to that was Goldwater in '64, and my Republican friends said no because the base of the party had moved south and west. And the last time, and I did a piece on this, and if you think about this, the last time there was a vulnerable Democratic incumbent was 1980. Think of the Republican feel in 1980. I know, Mr. President, Governor Reagan, President Bush, President Reagan, President Bush, Howard Baker, Bob Dole, John Conley, John Anderson. I mean, these were like titans of American politics. I mean, agree or not agree, these were all, if there was any such thing as a sort of public service hall of fame, there'd be 5 people in it. And, come on, I don't have to be a Democrat. You just stack this up, and you go, wow. And then you have the without fail. I mean, in the end, the only person in this field that has any chance of being a nominee is Romney. Santorum, Gingrich, never, they don't have a chance. Now, could the system break down? There's a possibility that could happen, but it's unlikely. But this process is going to go on and on and on. And it's just, I don't, I'm not being anything, but I'm not telling you anything you don't know. This has not been, for Republicans, this has not been the happiest time. It just hasn't. And, I just be sort of honest about that. And it's kind of odd because really the president is kind of got approval ratings are hovering around 50 now. It'll probably be faced with 8% unemployment. It could be anything could happen. It's sort of remarkable that it didn't draw a different feel. It's a kind of remarkable thing. And I think anybody that studied American politics is sort of mystified at an event that has typically been so predictable and its outcome, and this has been so, it'll end up with Governor Romney, but there's going to be heck to pay between now and the time that it does.
Let me just put this in some context, because James speaks of this field that we don't recognize as being of stature. In the race, in the 1992 race, we called James's field the Seven Dwarfs, and they deserved that. And we went into it with a 91% reelect and an economy that really was growing and ended up for a GDP of 5.7% for that year. This president does not have those fundamentals. And what it continues to beat President Obama's are the message. So where his numbers are fluctuating ostensibly with the economy, when the press, as it was in the case in 1992, 92% of the coverage in the press in 92, when the economy was growing at 5.7%, was negative. So now think of that, when the unemployment rate drops 0.2%, and they say the economy's coming back, when the CBO says the real unemployment rate is 15%. So we have the opposite press, which is masking ostensibly, and not ostensibly, it's masking what's really fundamentally going on out there. And people are more concerned than has ever been charted since the inception of polling with their future. And presidential elections are always about the future. And when you go issue by issue, the Republican position, the conservative position, on particularly the economic issues and the role and scope of government, and in conjunction with the opposition to Obamacare, which is intense and has not only remained intense, it's grown in intensity of opposition. When those things go head to head, it's incumbent upon the Republican to be able to articulate them. So going back to these 20 debates, which are, yes, they are. If I had to watch another one, I'd be an alcoholic at this point. I can't. But it's strengthening everybody's articulation and their capacity to make these arguments. And the arguments beat that beats the president.
Yeah, I'll get to make one point here. I'm not mentioning President Reagan, President Bush. Okay, let's say that's unfair. Try to get Bob Dole and Rick Santorum out of your mouth at the same time, or Howard Baker and Newt Gingrich. I mean, these guys were also Rands in 1980. I mean, the gulf in the two fields is literally breathtaking.
And President Obama does have some enviable advantages as the incumbent coming up on the general election. Some headwinds out there too. Gas prices are coming up. Stubborn unemployment numbers. I know a group that you're affiliated with, James, Democracy Corps, put out a poll that said the message that America's back isn't working right now. How do you see the playing field for the incumbent, for President Obama going forward?
Well, right now, I don't think that a Republican can beat President Obama. I think events can beat him. I think if events stay on the same track they are, I think he'll be reelected. But there are any number of reasons. The biggest underlying story in American politics is the demographics of the country are changing. And Governor Jeb Bush, certainly former President George W. Bush recognized this. You look at what they're having to go through in this primary. Governor Romney's position on immigration, I'm going to try to be polite, is idiotic. But it is, I'm sorry, it is. The idea that 13 million people are going to return to their country in origin and wait in line and come back to the United States is not a tenable position. Governor Jeb and Karl Rove both have said that the debates and the language about this has gotten out of hand. Mr. President, when you were elected in 1988, 85% of that electorate was white. In 2008, it was 74%. There's nothing between us and 65%. And the idea that you're putting in Governor Jeb and Carl both recognize this. The idea that these guys are going through this ringer and having this is going to be detrimental for a long time to getting votes in the general election. And this is why there's a lot of sort of angst that's going on here. And the president, because he's very vulnerable in terms of a lot of different things, but the combination of what's happening on the Republican side and the changing demographics of the country lead me to believe that if the price of gas goes to $6 a gallon and stays there for like 3 months, sure, that would have a much larger effect on the economy. But generally what happens is the best cure for high prices is high prices. I mean, it sort of goes down. But that's my sort of analysis. Events ain't going to have to conspire to beat him right now.
Can I make a counter-argument to the demographics is destiny point that James just made, which he's written 6 books. I think one of them was on that. I don't read his books. I haven't read his half of the book we wrote together. But and we've had this discussion, and he makes a legitimate point. If the presumption is that Hispanic Americans whom are not homogenous vote as a block, nobody votes as a block. Republicans don't vote as a block. Catholics don't vote as a block. There's only one in the history of our representative republic that has, and that's African Americans. Republicans need to do a better job. That there is a receptivity in the Hispanic community is evident in George W. Bush, in Jeb Bush, in Mayor Martinez, Governor Martinez, Governor Sandoval, Mark Rubio. I could go down this. I had the pleasure of having lunch with Governor Martinez recently, who was a Democrat, who was taken out to lunch by Republicans, and not to be overtly converted, but they went through the issues with her. And at the end of the lunch, she turned to her husband and said, "Dang, we're Republicans." And if we don't go and talk to people, it doesn't matter what your demography is. If Republicans don't go and talk to people, then they can't expect to earn their vote. We have to do a better job. We're trying to do a better job. The people who are running the party now know that and are working aggressively at it. But the notion that an increasingly non-white electorate is going to accrue to the detriment of Republicans is neither evident nor necessary.
This past week, the Washington Post released a poll or a survey from readers. They asked their readers to name the most underrated president in American history. And the president that gained the most votes in the nomination for that distinction was the 41st president of the United States.
And we didn't even cheat.
And so my tough gotcha curveball question for you, Mary, did the Post readers get it right? Of course they did.
Well, of course they did. And, the Davidsons, there they are. The Davidsons, who are our neighbors and our friends from Louisiana, we were flying down today and had this really, really moving conversation about the loveliness, the graciousness of Barbara and George Herbert Walker Bush. And it almost makes me tear up when I was looking at the list of people. Look at all the old Bushies are here. I learned loyalty from the Bush family. I learned resolve from Mrs. Bush. The epitome of duty, honor, country. It's all the Bush family, all the kids and them. And setting aside what President Bush guided us through, the transformation of the Western world, a really bad recession, and the transformation from statesmen in politics to in a in the statesman age to the information age, which rewards monkeys in politics. I mean, I'm not saying they aren't. I respect everybody who gets in the arena. I really do, including our current field. Whatever their mishaps, many of them are due largely to having the camera on you 24/7. But the transitions that President Bush and Barbara Bush led us through are, you can only have the hindsight of history to appreciate that. But the loveliness and graciousness of them, their family, and their example are really something people miss today. They do, and they bring it up all the time to us. What are you laughing at?
You're not going to make me feel bad about the 92 campaign.
Yes, I am.
No, I agree, and I also think, you know, really great human beings, great people. I mean, you know, when you go back and you look at things, sometimes, you know, history gives you some sort of hindsight, and you know, we don't know. I mean, the world sort of changes. Look at how rapid things are changing in the Middle East now. And I always tell my students, you be careful, because in the idea, you know, and of course the role of the United States changes, a different world, and things change. And I think with President Bush, if you do look back in that period of time in our history, was really pretty remarkable and was very, you know, got a lot done. I mean, let's remember the Clean Air Act, the American Disabilities Act, the budget agreement that I think was underappreciated in terms of the recovery we had in the 90s. And think of also, not to mention what happened in the Middle East during that period, which was a remarkably successful time for U.S. politics. So yeah, I think I think President Bush and Ms. Bush can be very, very proud of the record that they had, not just in the White House, but as Vice President, directed the CIA and the Congress and a lot of other things. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, and post-presidency. I mean, it's really one of the remarkable lives of any American in recent American history. I'd say that without any fear of. And I will say this, that I think my guy, President Clinton, has acquitted himself pretty well too. So I can say something nice about him while I'm here also. And to thanking all of you for the terrific work that they did in New Orleans.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you all of Texas for what you've done for us. I want to add to the President Clinton. You know, you have to get some perspective, because I could not even say his name, a la how Barbara Bush referred to James forever. But the Clintons and the Bushes have become, when we see President Clinton a fair bit, and we just went to his 20th anniversary. I, of course, hid in our hotel room the whole time, but he and Mrs. Clinton, Secretary Clinton, are great public servants, and if there's anybody that never fails to say lovely, beautiful things about the Bushes, it's President Clinton, who really does think he's your son. I mean, he really does think he's been adopted. That used to be a sort of a press thing, but he's Mama and Daddy. He's really very, very close.
John King of CNN was supposed to moderate this event, couldn't attend, unfortunately, because of a conflict. But I asked him to send a few questions, and he sent one or two that Ross Perot and the Reform Party, I don't know why, I'm just not going to go there. But he did send one question that I'd love to get your insights and your experience in media and politics, that crossroads there. John said, please comment on the change in our media communications world. Would the 92 campaign have played out differently had the Twitterverse and the blogosphere and a more mature Fox News and MSNBC cable dynamic existed back at that time?
You know, all of this, Bob Casey, who was governor of Pennsylvania, once told me that David Lawrence, who was the previous governor, gave him the best advice he ever had. Never write a letter, never throw one away. And everything, and it's really hard because everything that you do is instantaneously communicated. If your worst moment of the day, you know, your worst moment of the month is captured by somebody with a cell phone, or if you say the wrong thing, or I'm going to tell you, the shortest thing that you're going to ever get is the collected tweets of one J. Carville, because you ain't going to get none. Because you're going to say what's instantly on your mind, and you're going to end up being embarrassed by it. And and to some ways, there's something to be said for. As Sam Nunn once said of Newt Gingrich, he doesn't understand the glory of the unspoken thought. But because it all gets captured, and because everybody is waiting for the sort of one thing that you can repeat over and over and over again, I think John has a sort of good point. And now everything is sort of shielded off. We were laughing. We were sitting out there. Then Governor Clinton, he would go to the back of the plane and talk with the press so much they'd fake like they were sleeping. Now, because everybody is so, and I think justifiably of some extent to get, and the images tend to get repeated over and over and over and over again. And I think people just, the campaigns and the candidates have to adapt to this all the time. But it is a different world. I mean,
and not necessarily a better one. And greetings from John King, who is one of the good guys, and he really is. And if you look at these debates, he didn't ask gotcha questions. He really is sorry to not be here. He wanted to do that. John happened to be the guy. There's no way he couldn't ask that question. But there are some good things, and there are some really negative things. The good things about the information age and the plethora of opportunities to get information is that you can get information. The negative is, as chronicled by Columbia University, who studies this, and it's an irony, that there's exponentially more outlets and there's fewer news stories. They just follow the herd. So I don't know, and if you do, someone asked me, Donna Brazil said, oh, you got to be a Twitter or tweet, whatever. It gives me ADD. I can't even look at it. Up until recently, James thought the internet was the interstate. I mean, so he's now iPadding and he's addicted to all that, but it's too, sometimes less is more. In the 1992 campaign, we were so sophisticated. We had a blast fax. And we could fax 100 people with one button. Remember that? And we'd have to get permission from Phil to do it. And we thought we were, but the essence of campaigns, the essence of life, relationships, anything, is not how you're saying it, it's what you're saying. Cicero or Plato or whatever. So a lot of information or the capacity to dispense a lot of information can never make up for not having anything to say. So, you can tweet till the cows come home, and I get that's a mixed metaphor, but if you're not saying anything, but really what has changed is this constant exposure caricaturizes, parodies people in ways that do not remotely represent their body of work, the whole of who they are. And think about this. If you had something on you 24/7, if every utterance, you or your wife or anything, it's hard. It's hard work. Newt said something this week relative to the brokered / contested convention, which said somebody's just going to waltz in here. This is hard work. It's hard work under any circumstances, but to always be under the Klieg light is just, I don't think it's an advantageous element for our candidates, but it is advantageous for citizens who need to be informed. Our founders predicated our representative republic on the notion that they would remain informed and be participatory and be virtuous. They have the capacity to do that now with access to information that was otherwise too difficult to get.
I just have a thing, and I always tell my students, too, I guess. When I was in college, I went to LSU, we had the Baton Rouge paper.
For 11 years.
And that was it.
Sorry.
I loved college. The best 4 years of my life I spent as a sophomore. And that was it. And maybe the New Orleans paper. If you wanted to read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, you had to go to the library. It came 4 days late and you read it on a stick. All right? Now you can go on you can anything that you want. Now, do I think that today's students, or if you go to A&M, you might have got the Houston paper, and that was it. Now these kids get anything in the world. Do they know any more about what's going on in the world than the students here in 1964 did? No. And this is the problem with information, is people use information for validation, not illumination. And if you're a liberal, or you don't have to read anything. You can spend every day of your life, every hour of your waking moment, reading people who agree with you. The same thing if you're a conservative. As I say, it's like a drunk uses a lamppost for support, not illumination. So everybody goes to some place to be told that what they thought before was right. And so the way that I deal with it is I have picked what I thought are 5 issues that are going to be an issue in the campaign, from, Keynes to immigration, to Keystone, to Iran, to healthcare. And I've just randomly assigned 4 people. You argue this side, you argue that side. I don't care what you're thinking. We just randomly selected people to argue a side, because I don't want them to silo information. I'd rather you not argue something that you already think. I'd rather you argue. I said, when you're through, you can think whatever you want. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to say, argue whatever side, come to whatever conclusion you want. But if you're going to be in here, I don't like that. And so we got to ask ourselves, and Andy, this is just something to think about. It's something to educate us. Are we just leading people? Do they really know more? Does an A&M student really more aware of what's going on in the world today than they were 40 years ago before we had all of this? And I'm not sure that they do. I'm really not sure. And I don't know. I mean, you're right. There's no overall solution. It's just it is what it is. But it needs to be questioned. It needs to be thought out. And young people, particularly at a really terrific university like this, need to be made aware of the dangers of just being validated as opposed to being challenged.
Can I jump off this
Please.
point on young people? And I know James agrees with this. Whether or not you have a better understanding of the world because of the nature of the way in which information is distributed has nothing to do with how smart you are, how wise you are. He's affiliated with Tulane. I'm with Loyola. We work with young people all the time, and we have 2 teenage daughters. So, but young people are so inspiring to me. In New Orleans, if we didn't have our young people, we'd be, as James used to say, a sliv on a river. Because they come back from all over the country, and they're Teach for America, and we're leading in education reform. We're the #1 city for startup businesses, entrepreneurship. These are kids who are doing this because they see the world they're the iPad world. They make their profile. There's no cookie cutter young people. They're creating their own realities, and it's a thing to behold. James has a supper after they all come to the house after his class on Tuesday night, and they're really invigorating and visionary and practical, but idealistic. And the reason we remain optimistic, really super optimistic, not just about our country, but our cities one by one, is because young people we say this all the time to them. We left you with a big mess, but you made a big mess, and we cleaned it up when you were little. So now, but it's a special generation, James. Don't you think? Your kids and our Loyola kids.
Look, I mean, my kids, yeah, they go to Tulane and they get 300 they want to get in a class. But I don't know that they engage to the extent that I would like to see them. All right, and that's why. And I think we got to expect, just like kids that come here, to get into this place, to come here, you got to be pretty bright. Well, they got to be challenged. Because if we're going to create new leaders, they got to be challenged and put through the ringer sort of a lot more.
What do you mean by engaged, though? I mean,
it's to everything that's going on. if it's in the Middle East, if whatever it is, that you got to be challenged and think about these kinds of things. And I bring in I had Newt Gingrich came to my class, as has Arthur Laffer. When they debate Keystone, they're going to debate it in front of Daniel Yergin, who's probably one of the great energy experts in the country. And I want them to be exposed to everything. And I always tell them, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm 67 years old. It only matters that you think. What I think is less important. That you just think is the really important thing, because I'm just here to import something to you that, but you're the people that are going to make the sort of difference here. And being that I don't have any influence whatsoever on my two daughters, I just as soon take it out on the students. My favorite question, people said, are you raising your children to be Republicans or Democrats? And I said, do you have kids? I can't get them to close the door. How in the world do you think that? If I just get them to close the door, I'll be happy.
Former Speaker Pelosi was here on this stage earlier this week and issued at that time, I think media reports and everybody I know that attended, a very eloquent call for more civility and bipartisanship. Last November, the two of you hosted the 3rd Annual Bipartisan Policy Center Summit at Tulane. And I'm wondering, what did you learn from that experience? I mean, are we ever going to get back to a day, for example, in foreign policy, that politics stops at water's edge? Or is that naive?
Well, it's a great conference, but what did we learn? Nothing, because it's all our friends. But I don't mean it like that. I think this is a miscast conversation. I am a proud partisan. I think bipartisanship, for the sake of bipartisanship, is meaningless. Like you're a conservative or you're a liberal for good reason, and argue it, stand up for it, debate it. That's what this country was built on. I mean, like, that does not give you license to demagogue or to be uncivil to your the incivility is the last refuge of a demagogue. If you can't make a debate, then you can just call people names or have these ad hominem attacks. But some things have changed that are contributing to this, and they've happened over time, or contributing to the opportunity to remain uncivil. One, you wouldn't think of being uncivil in the presence of Mrs. Bush or Poppy Bush. They set the tone and tenor in those days. There was zero tolerance for that. Two, people lived together in Washington. If you had your spouse there, wives are civilizing influences, and and your kids went to the same school, and you broke bread together, you were less likely to say the kinds of things that people feel comfortable saying about each other on television. In that same time period, structurally, redistricting has created too many non-competitive districts, so the more safe your district is, the goofier you can be and the less compromising you are. But all of that incivility is a different conversation than partisanship. I know why I'm a conservative. I know why I'm a Republican. I started out as a liberal Democrat until I started reading, thinking, and paying taxes. So I've worked this through over 30, 40 years here, and I get it. I'm proud of it. I can't argue it. I hope I try to stay civil, but I think he largely does, although we don't really talk about this stuff. But I'm happy that he's a liberal. I mean, I think that's it's an esteemed. They're both esteemed philosophies. They're steeped in history. It has been ever thus, and I think some of the concentration or the focus on, oh, isn't this overly polemic, come from corners that do not have a record to stand on or a debate point to make. So they just want to say any debate is a product of incivility, and it isn't.
A little bit. First of all, if you go back and you read the stories about the election of 1800. It was unbelievable. I mean, we were like playing tiddlywinks compared to what Jefferson and Adams were doing back there, if you look at this kind of histories of that. We had a period of great incivility in this country in the 1860s. So lost 600,000 people. Having said that, it is pretty bad. And I think and to some extent, people develop a political persona, they develop a political philosophy over a period of time, and that's to be understood. But sometimes it's good to, like, and I think President Bush was very good at this, to have a drink with the other side. And, you know, if you have an opinion on Nancy Pelosi, you leave here and you go, well, you know what, maybe she wasn't all that terrible. Might not agree with her, but she's probably not trying to bring about the ruination of the United States of America or something. And that's what this sort of bipartisan conference, and things like that, are sort of good to the extent that, you're not going to change somebody's mind. It's got to develop something over a period of time. But once you know somebody and you see them and you sit down with them, then you're a little more likely to understand where they're coming from. And that goes, to some extent, to sometimes agreeing on things that we can sort of agree on and getting something done that you might be able to do, and to sort of compromise. And, you know, in politics, very seldom is something going to happen. And the Founding Fathers did it on purpose, that you're going to get 100% of what you want. You'd have to have a mega election to be able to do that. So if you come out and you get 62% of what you want, you've done pretty good. But the system doesn't work if you insist that I'm going to get everything, I want this or nothing, because unless you got 60 Senate votes and a majority in the House, you're not going to be able to do that. And the game is rigged to produce a result where no one wins the whole thing. That's the essence of being sort of conservative, if you will. That's why they rigged the game like that. That's why the Constitution is written that way. And it doesn't work if people are not willing at some point, when you win an election, to say, okay, I'll take, whatever the result of the election is, 65% of what I want. Or sometimes you're forced to take 51 and think that you want. Or sometimes you're forced to take 40 and, hey, that was better than the 35 that I thought we were going to get. It's rigged that way. And until we understand that and appreciate that, we're going to be sort of doomed to be unhappy about what we can produce. We just can't produce a 100-0 win. It's not set up that way.
And when James says rigged, he doesn't mean...
I don't mean rigged. I mean, the Constitution is written...
You have to clarify when it's James speaking.
In the way that Madison rigged things.
But here is something different that in the legislative process, at least in Washington, what Poppy Bush did and what Andy Card did as the longest-running chief of staff for President 43, and in the Clinton era, too, we talked about this with the Clinton people, there was a place to start with what you agreed on. You didn't start with, here's my 100%, here's my 100%. So today we could have a 60-40 or a 48-52 on energy, on cutting the deficit, on entitlement reform. The Bowles-Simpson and everybody gave up a lot on there. Energy right now, maybe it's because we're in an energy state, but there's several places where there's enough of a starting point where we could get something done. So that means what James is saying structurally is not happening, is no one comes to the table with the 60-40 or the 50-50. Starting where you can start. They start where they want to end, and that's no way to make any progress.
I want to make sure we save time for some audience questions. I'm going to ask one more, but if you have a question, go ahead and start moving to the microphones in the aisle. And on the personal side, you did something 4 years ago that I found truly fascinating. You're these political heavyweights. One would think that your universe kind of spins around the 495 Beltway in Washington, D.C. You moved your family to New Orleans. Why did you do that?
first, what I said was, I was like an old Jew going to Jerusalem. I just wanted to go home. It's my idea, I'd been in. My wife, I give Mary enormous credit because my children, and she loved it there. The 88 convention, I think, was the thing that she speaks of anything in her life. I think she just enjoyed that so much and enjoyed working for President Bush. And when I asked her to marry me, she said the only way she'd do it if we got married in New Orleans. And this was 1993. And we talked about it, and she embraced it. And as those of you know, the thing about New Orleans is it has its own culture. I mean, we have our own music, our own food, our own social structure, our own funerals, our own body of literature, our own architecture. We do everything different. And she's embraced what we call our otherness with real relish, and has really made a contribution to the city. So I give her enormous credit that she would come to a place like that. Couldn't be happier, because we're only like a city of 350,000 people now. But I mean, the real remarkable thing is, the mayor tell you, I just chased him down. I wouldn't let him not run. I followed him around. No, you got to do this, man. We like it, And so it's really gratifying. If you're in Washington and you go to a fundraiser for the Kennedy Center, that's great. It's a good cause. You don't feel the impact. Here, you do something and you raise money for Teach for America, and you feel the impact. You go, you see these kids in the school, they come by your house, you see them, you do things, and so you got a real sense of a feedback, and it's really a remarkable thing. Plus, I mean, I'm from there, and my blood is the color of ditch water. I mean, it's just brown like the river.
So is his roux, which is a good thing, actually. I think if I had known how perilous the situation was when we moved to live on a river, I would have thought about moving a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. So I don't want to get a lot of credit for having courage. But we are very family-oriented. James is the oldest of 8. They're not in New Orleans, but Louisiana itself, by all census data, is the least mobile state in the country, which is people make fun of. But why that is so is not because they're Philistines, and is because they love it there and they want it. We say hello in 2 ways: who dat, or we say how your mama and them. And so everybody knows everybody's mother. And let me tell you, raising kids in a place where they know every mom knows their mom. So it does take a village to raise kids. And I wanted my kids to be raised in a sense of place, with family, with neighbors, where it is their duty to go out and work with these kids and work in the schools and replant the coast. And it's a beautiful place to raise a family.
There's one custom down there, Ms. Bush, as much as anybody, I'm sure that you would appreciate this. If you have something at your home, if you invite people for dinner, you don't send an e-invite. You don't send it by mail. You hand deliver the invitation.
The wife hand writes the invitation.
Hand writes it, and the husband puts it on the door. Now, you would say that's not very efficient, and it's not. But we're not about efficiency. We're about hospitality. And so if you tell somebody your presence is important, we want to hand deliver the invitation to you. And in one sense, you look at that and you say, well, that's kind of. And then in another sense, you say it's part of what we are. And if you don't take steps to preserve a culture in every aspect of the culture, in particularly one that is as fragile as ours, in both environmentally and just any culture is always subject to being sort of diminished by just the way things happen. I think it's very important that a lot of the customs and traditions we have that seem antiquated to other people, but that are very important to us. I'm going to leave it at this. One of the things that happen in terms of our music, you can't go to the conservatory and learn this music. It's passed down, and the instruments are passed down. And after the what I refer to as the engineering failure of 2005, thousands of trumpets and drums and trombones and saxophones were lost. And people really came together to form a foundation to give these kids this so their generations could pass this down to the next generation. Because if you lose one generation, you lose the whole thing. And that's so much of the sort of richness of who we are. And that's why it's so important that to me, that the culture survive.
That's terrific. I think we've got a few questions.
A prebate, and do you think it presents a viable alternative to our current taxation system?
I thought you said these kids weren't
Wow.
as informed as they. Well, we agree that it's a problem, and we probably disagree on the solution, but, and it's a multi-part answer. But entitlement reform, which is, if there isn't entitlement reform, we'll implode. We're cannibalizing our own budgets, family budgets on health care, the cost of health care, our government budgets, and there are solutions. There is a path. There was from Poppy Bush on down, we knew this was a problem, and President Clinton had some good ideas. Premium support was a Clinton idea for insurance reform. Associated health plans, health savings accounts, W. Bush. We worked on a lot of this, and there's bipartisan support, innovation. There's all kinds of ways to reduce, not shift the cost of health care, not ration services and provisions in the delivery of health care by cost cutting that way, but to combine innovation and market forces that connect the consumer of health care with the product. Right now, consumers pay 12 cents on a dollar for their health care. Well, if you were paying 12 cents on a dollar for what you were eating, you'd be a cow. I mean, you can't, people they're not making rational decisions because they don't need to make rational decisions. But that's the biggest part of the structural debt is a bigger problem than the deficit. That's why I get crazy in this earmark conversation. Earmarks to the federal budget are as a mosquito to the butt of an elephant. There's just no other way to compare it to entitlement reform. There are answers. There is no political will right now. And Poppy Bush got a lot of grief for the deficit reduction, which raised taxes, but we left the budget in good shape. Bowles Simpson had a lot of that stuff in there. So what we think of it is, I'm not going to speak for him. I think if we disagree on solutions, but that if we do not find the political will, which requires citizens to be informed so they're not responding to sound bites, then we have an unsustainable situation.
Thank you for your question. First of all, take a little bit different tack than anyway. I think the 16th Amendment was a great thing. I think a progressive tax on income is the finest way there is to fund the government. I really do. And so I'll start with that premise. You want to do away with some deductions, or you want to make it simpler? That's fine. But I agree with Adam Smith. The people that make more ought to chip in more, pay a higher rate. They have more to protect. Secondly, on the question of entitlements, it depends on how you view it. If you view the problem that the government spends too much on health care, that leads you to one solution. If you view the problem that the country spends too much on health care, that leads you to another solution. Because if you reduce the amount that the country spends, then you reduce the amount the government spends. I'll give you one fact. The government of Canada pays a lower percent of GDP in health care than the government of the United States. Now think about the implications of that. In Canada, the government provides 99% of the health care, but they spend 11% of their GDP on health care. We spend 18%. So if you say, well, we can spend, because I mean the government has Medicare, they have Medicaid, they have VA benefits, they have federal employees' health insurance, they have the military health system costs gazillions of dollars. If you don't reduce the overall cost and you just shift costs and you say, well, we're just going to pay less in Medicare, we're going to pay less in Medicaid, you're still dealing with the overall problem. And until you get, right now we have 20 out of 100 people out of 65 and older. By 2020, 26 out of 100 are going to be 65 and older. If we're at 18, northern industrialized countries at 12, a lot of healthcare economists think there's nothing between us and 35. That will destroy the country. The country could not sustain spending that much of its GDP on healthcare. So you as a young person, I would urge you to sort of look at that and really get involved in this argument about how, or this discussion about how we can reduce the overall cost of healthcare in the country. But that's the thing that's the thing that can kill us. That more than anything else is the biggest threat to the security of the United States, is rising healthcare costs.
And while you're thinking about this, remember this. Canada and every place else can have a somewhat lower healthcare cost because America is a healthcare innovator. We have the best healthcare in the world. We innovate more. We develop these medicines and drugs. We develop these life-saving and life-quality devices, and everybody comes here. So that is going to cost a little bit more. We're not going to be able to deliver what Singapore, at the rate that Singapore, Canada, or any place else. And when they get sick, they come here. Now, Dick Cheney, my boss, who was here just for the 12th, the anniversary of the first Gulf War, he's walking around with what looks like a suicide bomb. Okay, that used to be, and he has no pulse. He has a heart strapped around that was not even remotely possible a couple of years ago. So we keep innovating. Innovation costs a lot of money. There's a way to incentivize innovation. But there's some level of cost that is appropriately high in a country that's the innovative leader in the world.
I'd like to try and sneak in. I think we've got time maybe for 2 more questions if we're quick here. Let's come over to this microphone.
My name is Mark Womack. I'm a first-year student at the George Bush School. I actually also grew up just outside New Orleans, and if you guys like it there, you should try Texas because it's pretty great here.
Where'd you grow up?
I think Louisiana.
If you like New Orleans, you love Texas. You like Texas.
Yeah, it's awesome. My question, unfortunately, is not a simple one. How do you feel the current tensions with Iran will shape American foreign policy in the next year, and how do you see those tensions playing out in the 2012 presidential election?
Well, let me start. Bob Gates, who I think people here are familiar with, and who has served this nation with distinction as director of the CIA, as Secretary of Defense under both President George W. Bush and President Obama, said that Iran was the single toughest issue that he's ever had to deal with. Now, if Bob Gates doesn't have to answer, I guarantee you James Carville don't have to answer. I promise you that. And beware of people offering simplistic solutions to this. Because if there's one, Bob Gates would have thought of it. And sometimes there's one of the things as a young person, and is I would urge you to say, there are problems and there are situations. And you got to determine if this is a problem or a situation. A situation you can manage, a problem you can solve. But if you try to solve a situation, you're going to make it worse. You're going to make it worse. And so you got to take it from that point. But I have no idea what the answer is. I'm having my students argue, and we'll go through it, and I'll have them present both sides. But whatever the answer, whatever it is, whether you manage the situation or try to solve it, if Bob Gates thinks it's hard, I guarantee you one thing, it's hard.
James makes an essential critical point. We don't, the answers are unknowable. And experts from Gates to Cheney to Panetta to everybody, the transition that's going on in that world is so unlike anything we've experienced relative to our policy making. We, in the W. Bush years, we had a transition out by necessity, stability and deterrence, because that enemy could not, you couldn't deter them by mutually assured destruction. They wanted to be destroyed. They wanted to see those 72 virgins, and there were no state borders. So we have worked together, President W. Bush in the freedom programs, the democracy programs. James and I went to Iraq. Well, they didn't let us go to Iraq. They brought the Iraqis to us and their constitution. We've both been in Afghanistan. George W. Bush was absolutely right that freedom is God's gift to humanity, but how you go about securing your freedom is so difficult, so hard. It so has to happen over time, and I want to say something in defense of President Obama, whose foreign policy is incoherent, but there's a reason it's incoherent. You can't know. I mean, it would be nice if you had what you say triggers intervention in Libya would apply equally to Syria, but his no doctrine owes to the fact that it's hard to have an overarching doctrine in a world where everyone still continues to look to America for their defense, there is no collective global security. It's America. Whatever America does, that's what's going to get done. So I think all the Bush administrations and Obama, we all need to get the civilized world, I use that term tentatively, the free world, to understand that there is a need to have effective, functioning, collective global security, because what we have now is not working, and it's not working at a time where the answers are not easily discovered, and that includes the Middle East. We could actually defend ourselves, but it's obvious, and so could Israel to an extent. But Saudi Arabia, everybody on the peninsula there, they need to step up too. So the question is, how's it going to play out in the elections? I hope for the best, but plan for the worst. I don't think we'll have a illuminating foreign policy discussion. I think it's sort of going like this now. If Obama said it, it's wrong. If the Republicans say it, it's warmongering. And if we keep going like that, you'll have to wait till the next president to sort through it.
Unfortunately, this has to be the last question because I know we have to duck into the next auditorium for the crowd there. But your question, sir, please.
I'm Cadet Nathaniel Rummerl from Texas A&M University. And again, thank you for coming and enlightening us. In reference to the 2012 election, how important do you think finding alternative energy solutions will be for the candidates?
You know, I've been reading this because I got Jurgen coming into my class, and I'm sort of impressed by the lead time in this stuff is forever. And, you know, we always think that we're just sort of, and we may be one sort of breakthrough away, but the energy mix in the United States is probably going to stay pretty consistent here for the next 10 to 15 years of what we're doing. But sure, and the other thing we got to remember, as it points out, is the real energy source is conservation. That's a source in itself, and we can't forget that. And you look at how much fuel an airplane burns today compared to what an airplane burned 20 years ago, or a car. But you look at just what they're doing. And I mean, I think some of the bigger breakthroughs are going to come through there. So when you think about, you think of wind, and some of it can be feasible. The same thing with solar, same thing with nuclear, same thing with anything. But the biggest potential energy source we have for you in the next phase of your life, in the next, I don't know the exact time, 15 years or so, is going to be conservation, which is a really, really big part of the mix here. And it's not just here, it's kind of everywhere, and we need to, hydro. I mean, they're doing some stuff. There's some innovators down in New Orleans that are doing, are really looking at the river is one potential giant energy source. And how do we know that we won't be able to harness that kind of power in the future? And the sooner it is, the better off we're going to be. But the lead time in all of this I've become very impressed with. You just don't turn this stuff around in a year. It takes a while.
Where's Andy Card? Don't you love hearing James Carville say would Andy, in the George W. Bush administration, Dick Cheney, President Bush in the first week in office, signed an executive order to make energy, a comprehensive energy plan a #1 goal. And Dick Cheney famously said in his speech, conservation is a virtue, but it's not an energy plan. Well, you would have thought we said, drill, baby, drill, here, now, everywhere, on the forehead of every green person. It was just insane. Now, and George W. Bush did more to escalate and expand energy efficiency. I'm just not talking, Tony, I'm not really arguing with you. I'm just saying, yes, conservation is an important part of it. Energy efficiency, which nobody advanced more and more quickly than George W. Bush, including, like, he wouldn't let us leave our cell phones plugged in because it is a vampire drain. I'm like, oh, get over it already. Like, we'd have turned off the lights and everything. But America is sitting on a glorious abundance of energy that can be developed for progress. Energy is the engine of progress. It ever has been in the world. And let me show young people. CO2 is not a pollutant. You're breathing it, okay? You're exhaling it. So some of these, and Poppy Bush has made huge advances on environmentalism. So there are pollutants, and we can produce energy without concomitant debilitating impact on our environment. No one wants to believe, Republicans don't want to have their rivers lit and their kids choking of asthma and all that, but the notion that we have such abundant hydrocarbons that we're not extracting and natural gas, and we have the means to get more of them cheaper and in a clean way, or that we're not doing more nuclear, but we're running around thinking about putting solar panels on our back and riding our bikes to work. I just gotta, it's aggravating.
Yeah, I was disagreeing with Cheney. I think it's not a virtue. I think it's a way of life. It's more than that. And in terms of CO2, Texas A&M has a really first-rate Department of Atmospheric Science. There are 23 faculty members here. Would you like to guess how many of them say that global warming is real and that humans contribute to it? How many do you think? 23. But of course, they're part of this place is sort of known to be a bastion of liberal academia, you know? Yeah, 23. And the one thing is that the energy you don't use is the energy you don't use. And we got to appreciate our ability to keep doing it. I don't think we're going to be able to change the mix in the immediate future. Everything changes over a period of time. But I do think that conservation is a real source here.
Well, we've got to jump over to the next auditorium, but before we do that, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Bush Presidential Library Foundation, our sponsors, Texas A&M University. It was 9 years. Let's not wait 9 years to do it again.
Thank you.